This show is a proud member of the Nerdy Legion Podcast Network. Get more at nerdylegion.com. Enjoy the show.
This is Brightside Home Theater.
Hey, home theater nerds, welcome to Brightside Home Theater Podcast, the podcast that focuses on the experiences we have in our theaters, the sights, the sounds, the scenes, all the fun that we like to have. And this week, not so much the sights, the sounds. We're going to have some fun. We're going to sit down with Ara and we're going to talk about DVDs, Blu-rays, 4Ks, basically expand on something. If you listen to their podcast over at HT Guys, if you listen to them, Ara and Braden, last week, they talked about, the differences between DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K and the numbers. And I thought it was right away. I heard it and I texted Ara and I said, I'd love to expand on this a little bit and have a conversation with you about it. And he was like, absolutely. So we jumped on. I didn't know what week I was going to put it out, but here we go. Let's do that. It was a lot of fun. Ara's a blast to hang out with. And so we talk about that. We actually get into 8K TVs as well. That was, from my perspective, well, you'll hear it. But before that, let's get to the pleasantries. My name's DJ. If this is the first time listening to the podcast, my name's DJ, I'm the host of Brightside Home Theater Podcast. You can reach me on Twitter at BrightsideHT, or you can email me at brightsidehometheater@gmail.com. And you can check out this podcast and all the other podcasts I've done at the website, brightsidehometheater.com. I'm actually updating that as well, adding more and more to that. There's a search feature. I haven't mentioned that in a little while. You can just type in any movie. If I've done it, it'll pop up. Even if I've just talked about it, like some of my earlier podcasts where I didn't feature the movie, I just talked about a movie if it's in the show notes, it'll show up there. Speaking of show notes, I think the website's becoming even more important now because Apple did an update on iTunes on their podcast app, and you can't get, the show notes don't show up there anymore, or I haven't figured it out. And for my other podcast, for this podcast, there's timestamps in my show notes and everything. And when you go on Apple, it doesn't show up. It only shows the first few lines. I haven't figured out how to be able to see the full amount of show notes there. So if you're ever in doubt, go to the website. It's there. Obviously on YouTube, that's still showing everything. You can see all the timestamps there as well. But yeah, everything on the website, all the links that I talk about, those are always there at the website. And on the website, speaking of which, you can help donate. You can help support the podcast by donating to Patreon. You give as little as $1 a month. On the website, there's a little red button, help donate. It says there. Or you can just go to Patreon and patreon.com/Brightside Home Theater. And $1 a month, that's $12 a year. I mean, where can you get content like this for that? I hate being a salesman. This is not for me. But yeah, any and all is appreciated. I appreciate all 14 of my supporters. Thank you very much. Also appreciate all of my followers on Twitter. We have a new one this week, JJ Hunsecker. Thank you very much for following along. Enjoy the conversations with everybody. That's where I seem to be engaging the most. I'm getting a lot at YouTube as well. Not as much as on Twitter, but it is growing on YouTube as well. So having a lot of fun over there. If you want to check that out, please, hit subscribe, help me out over there too. I don't know how that helps me out. I know I want this to grow. Sometimes, you want things to happen, but if it does, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I appreciate it all. I'm just having fun talking home theater. And so let's get to some of those listener comments this week. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank everybody. I got a lot of response out of Saving Private Ryan last week. It was an emotional week for me. It took me multiple days of sitting down, being able to do that, going back and forth, watching that scene over. And it is a long scene. As I said, I basically did an entire breakdown. That was the equivalent to when I break down an entire movie. And right now I'm in that mode where I'm supposed to be going a little bit, trying to make these quicker and give me a little more time. But that movie deserved it, and you guys recognize that, and I think you recognize my emotion in that, and the feelings I have for my family members and my servicemen, everything like that. And a lot of people reached out and people I hadn't even heard of before, and had never heard of from before, on YouTube, on email, on Twitter. It was overwhelming, and thank you very much. I really appreciate it. So as far as comments, we have one from Adriano. He said, and I'm using Adriano because he's been a long-time listener, but I've heard this from a few people. A great comparison to Saving Private Ryan, that is. He says, a great comparison to this is the Band of Brothers and the Pacific TV series. Movie-level craft made for TV, an excellent viewing experience. Also, Hacksaw Ridge. It pulls no punches, conveying the horror of war. My goodness. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Highly recommended. And the reason I used Adriano is, one, like I said, Adriano, longtime listener. Love you, buddy. But he basically summed up what I got from a lot of people. Like, people would be like, oh, you got to see Band of Brothers, or, oh, you got to see Pacific, or you got to see Hacksaw Ridge. And the only one I haven't seen anything from is the Pacific. And I've had that recommended to me in the past. I have seen parts of Band of Brothers, and my explanation to most people last week was, I was supposed to watch that with my son, and he was younger at the time, and we were like, okay, we're going to sit down and watch this one together, and we still will get to it, I'm sure. But that's why I haven't taken that one in. And Hacksaw Ridge, I haven't seen in years. But yes, I agree with you. Everybody, all three of those, everybody was hitting me with that. Like, you should see this one. You should see this one. And they are all very powerful. Adriano also said, just listen to your Saving Private Ryan episode this morning. Great episode, by the way. You touched on a listener comment about a dead pixel issue in Army of the Dead. I can confirm it also happened to me. It comes through on my TV as a noticeable white dot in certain scenes that comes and goes. I first noticed it in the diner scene early on. From what I've seen online, it does appear to be an issue with a 4K version of the film. I hope it does get fixed because it is an otherwise fun thrill ride of a movie. I haven't experienced it. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean it's not there on my screen. This dead pixel thing is, I feel this is how I'm interpreting it. A single pixel on your screen, or maybe it's two next to each other or whatever, but it'll pop in and out. My analogy for this is like, if there's like a high-pitched noise in the room and you say to somebody like, do you hear that? Do you hear that noise? And they go, no, listen, it's a really high-pitched noise. Then they hear it, and now you can't make it go away. I feel like that's what that dead pixel is. And if you spot it, well, now you'll never not see it. But if you haven't seen it, probably don't go looking for it, because if it pops up, then you'll be like, oh, now I see it everywhere. So I'm lucky enough. When I watched that movie, I just let it wash over me. I had a good time. I didn't see that. And it didn't pop out at me. So I don't know. But there are a lot of reports on that. So thanks, Adriano. Marcus on Twitter at FernGully21 at BrightSideHT. Hey DJ, got some input from at HDTV podcast about my new media room setup with a projector and surround sound. And now I need the top 5 movies to watch on it starting out. From the main man of home theater movie reviews. What do you got for me? Well, I don't know if I'm the main man, but I appreciate the sentiment. Thanks, Marcus. So I replied to him right away. I said, congratulations. I misspelled congratulations. We make mistakes all the time. So congratulations. I said COM. But my top 5, it's funny because when people ask me this, it's like, if you have it written down or something, what do you do? How do you do it? It's like, I always just go by what's fresh in my mind. And Jurassic Park is in DTSX. I have to go with that because that is just, it's a great movie. It looks fantastic in 4K. It sounds fantastic in the DTSX. So in the vibrations and everything, that's a tough one to listen to at reference level because it's recorded at such a high level. So I highly recommend that one. Lucy in 4K. That one to me, if people say what's the number one movie that jumps to your mind, and it's that one, only because it's not the best movie, it's probably not the best sound, but it's the most underrated, and I really want to get that message out there, if you can't tell. As my listeners know that ever since the Lucy one, I'm like, this is crazy. So it absolutely is, it has an unbelievable opening, and then for the rest of the way through the movie, you just can't wait for more sonic goodness. I don't know if that's, I just made it up. Sonic goodness. So Lucy 4K, John Wick 3, probably the most engaging of the 3 John Wick movies for sound. That one there, Monster Hunter in 4K. That one is fantastic. The sound on that, I just did that one a little while ago. That there's so many different effects that they used in that movie, and there's some great overheads in there. Any of the Lord of the Rings movies, so I clumped all those together because those are just absolutely crazy how well done they are for being so old. But what they did with the sound in there, the bass goes so low, but it doesn't go low like a Lucy does where it just like vibrates stuff. It's very appropriate, very powerful, and just a lot of fun. But then I said, I always break my theaters in with Star Wars. So my point in telling him this was, in telling Marcus this, was I always start with the same thing. Now, I picked Star Wars for a reason because of my attachment to Star Wars. But I think it's a good idea that whenever you upgrade a piece or whenever you change a system or you get a new system or you go to somebody's house and you want to watch a scene and compare it to your system, have that idea in your head. And mine is, it's Star Wars. So every time I upgrade something, the first thing I do, always the first thing I do is I play Star Wars Episode 4, but I call it Star Wars because that's what it was when it came out. And that way I can tell what the system is. And I'll give you an example. When I got the Zapiti, I couldn't wait. The first movie I downloaded to it was Star Wars. I connected to my system, I put it on, and it looked like crap. I'm like, what the hell? I was like, I'm like, the black levels were horrible. Everything was wrong. And I'm like, oh no. So I go online, I did this, and it needs to be fine-tuned. It needs to be calibrated. You need to tell it this is, what you're putting it out to and everything like that. Once I dialed it in, Star Wars looks fantastic. Now I know, because I've seen Star Wars so many times, now I know everything else should be on the same level, should look good. So it's always good to have that one movie or scene or something. Mine happens to be an entire movie, and that you always go back to because you'll always have that memory in your head of how good it's supposed to look and how it's supposed to progress as you get a new piece of equipment, whether it's a projector or it's a new receiver or new speakers. How does this sound and how does this look compared to what I've been doing for X amount of years? Fill in your number. So, Marcus got back to me on that. And he said, awesome, sounds great. But, he's like, I'll add in Star Wars because you can't go wrong with Star Wars. So, but that was, great question. What are the top 5? Those are my top 5 right now, if I had to say off the top of my head. Of course, there are more out there. But yeah, that's where I stand. So thanks, Marcus. Appreciate that. Steve George at Legal Beagle OK. Just watched episode 1 of Loki. For me, the best episode of the entire Disney Plus Marvel era. Very, very well written with a range of emotions and a genuinely intriguing premise. Waiting for the fans/geeks to say what all of the things in that drawer are in that drawer. Can you help at Brightside HT? It's a little early for me to put it out right now. So But next week on my Brightside chat conversation with John, we're going to break it down. I'll tell you right now, I've looked in the drawer multiple times. I've freeze framed. I haven't Googled anything. I haven't done anything like that. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. I replied to him online, spoiler free. I said, I think that drawer is more about the power or the perceived power in that drawer. That's, like I said, spoiler free right now because it just dropped. And actually, by the time you hear this, it will have been out for a couple of days. But I just don't want to, if you haven't watched it yet, I don't want to give anything away. But by next week, when my show comes out, it will have been out for a week. And I think John and I are really going to break it down. And maybe I'll even break it down a little bit in my podcast, in this podcast next week as well. But yes, I do agree that this is so far my favorite episode, my favorite. This has a chance to be better than WandaVision, better than Falcon Winter Soldier. The first episode is telling me that. I thought I'm very glad to see they didn't go up and they didn't have changing aspect ratios because I'm going to put my bars in. It looks fantastic, but putting those bars in the top and the bottom give me a better perceived black levels, so I like that. The sound I thought was really good, and it's just it changes the story, I think, the way we wanted WandaVision to. This is doing even more of what we thought about WandaVision, changing the story, changing the reality that we think we already knew. It's just incredible what Marvel's doing here. And what's funny is they're doing it with TV shows, and they're taking the MCU, which is supposed to be the big thing, the movies. Our perception of things are changing dramatically. We used to think TV was like, nobody does TV. Even the actors, they didn't want to do TV. They wanted to do the big budget movies. They wanted to do that. Well, John and I have talked about this a few times, but it really is, our perception is changing. Like TV is where it's at right now, or streaming. What we get streaming on Disney Plus and stuff is really kind of where it's at. And then we're going to go to the movie theater to see a 2-hour version and like, okay, that's going to be fun to do, but I want more backstory. Give me more on the streaming services. And it's funny how things are changing like that, because back when we were kids, anything on the little TV was like, it didn't really matter. But what really mattered, where the big money was, where everything great was in the movie theaters. And it's kind of reversing right now. So it'll be interesting to see Black Widow next month. So, all right. Thanks, Steve. And that gets us to this week's emails. And I'm going to apologize right now. I got a bunch of emails to get to. Carl sends in a bunch of emails. He sent in a top 10. I'll put it in the show notes. I have an email from G. Cornell that I'm going to talk about in a second in movies, but I have so many things. My head is swimming right now. It's not a cold. It's my allergies are killing me right now. So I'd really just like to move along. I'm sorry about that, but I will have the top 10 link to the top 10 in the show notes. No other conversations I had through email. Most of them all from Carl. Some movie theaters, AMC, as we all know, we see that stuff. Look at that. I'm doing the emails anyways off the top of my head. But yeah, so some movie theaters are coming out of bankruptcy. AMC is like doing the GameStop thing. They've got that going on. Whole bunch of stuff going on out there. But it does look like it is encouraging to see that movie theaters are coming out of bankruptcy. People are supporting them. And now I think even after next month, after July, when things seem to be ramping back up and state maybe will stabilize, movie theaters will stop booming again. That will be fantastic. So that's about where we stand on that. Let's get to some movies and scenes. And we have from Graham Cole. It says, push play on Prometheus. Good ship landing with some bass and some pans. Yes, I haven't seen Prometheus in a long time. My son and I saw that in the theater. It is a good movie, great movie in the theater. It's not one of my favorite movies as far as the alien story goes, but it is a good movie. Enjoyed it in the theater, enjoy it in my theater. So check that one out. And the next one we have is Wrath of Titans. And from G. Cornell through an email says, when's the last time you watched it? Got the disc from Netflix and watching it for the first time. The low frequency is so strong, it will make the popcorn jump out of your bucket. I love that reference, jump out of your bucket. So I emailed him right back and I said, hey, is this it? And I have the 3D version. Haven't watched that in a little while, but I really want to get to that because it's a great popcorn movie. It's a lot of fun. I don't remember the low frequency being that great, but I honestly can say I don't think I watched it with my new subs, so that should be fun. And I've had my subs for a couple of years, so I'll have to check that out. I haven't even watched the 3D version yet. I just know it's out on 3D, and I bought that and watched the Blu-ray at the time, but I didn't even have a 3D projector, so I got some fun in store for myself right now. So thanks, G. Cornell. Really appreciate that. All right. I guess that's it. We do have a featured theater. I have all the pictures. I just have to put it all together. I have to do the editing so for YouTube and everything. It's taken me a little longer. Hopefully next week I'll have that done. But if you'd like to have your theater featured here, you can send those in and send in pictures and a description, and I'll put it on the podcast. I'll talk about it on the podcast, and we'll be able to see it on YouTube. So I just got to get to work on that, and we'll have that hopefully next week. And that should just about do it. Let's get to our conversation with Ara. Let's bring Ara in. This is Ara Derderian from the HT Guys podcast. Hey, Ara, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Now that summer's here.
Yeah. We got hit with almost 100 degrees here today.
Oh, it's so funny you say that because in Southern California, it's cold. Yesterday, I was wearing
I can't wait
sweats.
to hear what this cold is.
Yeah.
What was the temperature?
The high was like 60 was our high, and it was cloudy the whole day. Well, I mean, for summer, come on. I mean, we get 100-degree days too. But today we had sunshine at least, and I think it was 72. This is the best time of year in Southern California because it's warm but not hot. Come July and August and September, it will get very hot here.
Yeah. Here we got, this is New England. So we're in the middle of a heat wave right now, probably high 90s today with humidity. But come Friday, it'll be like mid 60s.
Yeah.
It's like, here we go. Okay. But yeah, it was bad today. I got in my truck and it said it was like 101.
Yeah.
The temperature inside my truck. And I was like, oh God, the thermometer. But hey, it's nice to have you back. You're multi-time performer here on Brightside Home Theater.
Cool. Very cool.
And, but I've got to start out with congratulations, 1,000 episodes. I mean, that episode itself was a blast, but 1,000, honestly, face to face, how did you guys do that?
It was hard work and perseverance. It got to the point, it became a habit. And if we didn't do it, something felt wrong. And then likewise, we also made connections with a lot of our listeners. If we stopped doing it, we would lose a lot of those connections, and we just didn't want to do that. Plus, it gives me a reason to keep tinkering. And also, it gives my wife a reason to let me tinker. You don't know how many times I've said, the podcast paid for that. Don't worry.
Yeah, my podcast isn't paying for it yet. But no, I would tinker anyways. I did home theater all the while you guys were doing your thing. I didn't even know who you were at the time, but that isn't it for me. But I agree with you 100% when you say it's the listeners. It's amazing that until you do it, you don't understand how much they drive you.
Yes, for sure.
It's like every week there'll be times like, sometimes I'm jealous of you guys where it's like, it is hard work because you guys have to come up with the news and you have to come up with a topic and then keep it entertaining and stuff like that. I'm trying to take movies and I'm by myself. I have to come off as positive and do all this stuff. And sometimes it's just not there, but then you'll struggle through it and you'll get it done. And then the feedback, it just motivates you for that following week. And you're like, I got to do this again. And
that's true. And there have been some weeks where it was rough for us to come up with some topics. You mentioned the 1,000th episode. Going back through the archives, finding those stories was awesome. There we could have put so many more. It would have just been, a 3-hour show, but we just tried to pick some highlights.
Did you have a longer show and then cut it? Because it seemed like when you were talking, you were like, okay, that's enough.
No,
like,
I didn't. It was funny. The way it ended was exactly the way I felt when I was putting it together. When I got to, I think it was like 2016 or something like that, I said, oh, this is enough. And so I wrote in there, we're going to stop here. And then by the time we physically got there, I said, well, we're done. Leave something for the 2000th episode.
Yeah. Because what was funny is I'm listening, and I'm sure all of your listeners would say exactly what I'm about to say. It's like, we were having so much fun going through it, and then you're like, okay, we're done. I was like, no.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for that feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about leaving us wanting more.
Well, that's great.
Like,
yeah.
Do another 1,000th episode, like in a couple months. To revisit you. All right, we'll pick up at 16 and come on. Because it was a lot of fun hearing you, especially for somebody like myself that I've been listening for a few years, but not to the length that some of your listeners have for your entire span. And it was great hearing how you guys progressed, and you really haven't changed that much, I don't think, especially audibly,
Yeah, lately I've been trying to play around with my microphone, and I went back to basics. I pretty much got it dialed in. I had an issue with my noise gate on the last episode. It was too aggressive, so you could hear it opening and closing, but I think I got that resolved. So this week's show, after 1,003, I'll get it nailed.
You and I have talked about that off air, like how to mic sound and stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody told me this once, actually a few people. We're the only ones that notice that. Not me and you, but like podcasters. Most of our listeners, they don't notice the difference between one episode to the next. But even my partner on Brightside Chat, he's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And it's his voice.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I got to get your voice doing this. And like the room that he podcasts in, he redid it and took the carpet out and it got all echoey. I was like, oh, I don't like this. We've got to fix that. And I bought him another microphone and we had issues with that. And I'm like, I got to get this sound right. Most of the listeners are just like, I just want to hear you guys talk.
Well, that's interesting. And perhaps we are the most picky, because even like a lot of my woodworking, I'll show my kids, I go, oh, look at this mistake here, and I don't like the way this turned out. And they're like, Dad, nobody's even going to notice that. I said, yes, how can they not? It's staring right at them. And they're like, you're the only one who notices that. And perhaps that's the same sort of thing about the sound. Although the last one, it really was bothering me. And but no one's complained. A lot of times early on, we would hear something like, oh, yeah, Braden was clipping or something along those lines. But I haven't heard anything on this one. Either that or they're just tired of complaining.
Yeah, it's with me, they know I'm an amateur. So they're just like, just do what you do.
Yeah.
But all right. The reason I had you on and asked you was because in your episode last week, as we're speaking, you guys talked about DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K, like verse each other, how they're coming out. And the numbers you put out, I went on your website, looked at it there too, and it's like the numbers were staggering. I had no idea. I've seen the stats every week that different people tweet out, and how 4K is always the third in line. But it was like 200 and something thousand DVDs have been released. Movies have been released on DVD.
Well, yeah, and of course you have to remember that goes back to the 90s. So it's been around a lot longer than Blu-ray and UHD discs.
Right. And then Blu-ray was only at, what did you say, just over 24,000, something like that?
Yeah, might have been 29,000, but yeah, in that area.
And you remember the number. What was 4K at?
4K was less than 1,000. It was like 790, but it was less than 1,000. I was quite surprised.
Yes, it was 700 and something. I remember because I remember thinking but there's 700 4K Blu-ray movies that have been released. And what I thought was interesting is why they do so many on DVD but not the others, especially on, you'd think Blu-ray would have had time to catch up for the most part by now. But is it just that the quality, people don't care? I think most people, similar to what we were just talking about our audio quality in our podcast, I think majority of the population does not care. They don't see the things that we care about.
I totally agree with that. People who listen to our podcast are the ones who care. And even with that said, I care, but a lot of times I'll choose convenience over the quality. And I like 4K streaming. And I know the discs are higher quality. However, you have to get the discs, whether you buy them or whatever, and then you put it in the player. And when you're done, take it out and put it and store the disc. When you buy an electronic version of it, whether you rent it, especially if you rent it, it's easier. It's pretty darn good quality. And I know the main places where you could rent them from, Amazon, Apple, and Google, have very high quality streams. And Netflix, with their own content, it's not really on discs anyway, they have really good quality. And I think that's because the hardware has gotten stronger, compression has gotten better, and the network has gotten faster. The difference is not so bad that you have to get the disc. And I think that's what's causing a lot of this trend to keeping the lower quality stuff in a disc form, because a lot of people maybe don't have the required hardware and network capability. And, if you're watching on a 40-inch TV, DVD is just fine.
Right. But the other thing that I found interesting listening to you guys was the number of, for 4K is so low, and there's a huge push of people on Twitter and social media, like, we want more physical media, we want this. And like you were saying about streaming, how good the quality is, do you think it's possible that 4K, they're dragging their feet because it's the physical media of 4K is probably going to go away? Because we've had listeners ask us different times, like, which is better? Can you do comparisons? And I've done quite a few now. And my opinion is physical media is best for consistency, but streaming is getting really, really close. It's hard to tell at times the difference between the two.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of content you're watching. Imagine a scene where there's this huge explosion and there's a fireball. That is going to look better on a disc because the compression is going to have a lot harder time with that. But if you've got a very consistent looking, say, like a scene outdoors where things aren't changing as much, the compression will almost be hard to tell the difference. Just because what the compression does is whatever is the same in the image, it just kind of says next frame, just do the same thing. So if nothing's changing, it just carries that information over frame to frame. Right. But if things are changing, then the compression, you will lose information because things change so much. And that's why on those big blockbusters that have a lot of action and stuff like that, the compression, you'll see a difference. So it depends on what you're watching. But I don't think that the disc is going to go away. I just, I may have said that on the podcast flippantly, but in reality, it's just never going to be as popular as DVD was at its height. Similarly, I mentioned to Braden, people are still buying vinyl. And in my mind, there's better ways to listen to music. I know there's a lot of people who say vinyl is better, but it's a different sound for sure. And maybe you like that different sound. And that's fine. I'm not going to debate that. But it's still around. And that's why I think the UHD is going to be around. And it might be where the big action blockbusters, you're going to buy a disc. And the, talking head type of movies, you'll just stream it.
Well, what about this? So, Kaleidoscape, they're releasing movies through the Kaleidoscape, which is the only place you can get them, that are at a higher bandwidth and more, technically a superior product to physical media because they're not limited by the size of the disc.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that makes me think that the 4K now Blu-ray might stick around for the lesser movies, but the audio, like people like us that want like the top quality, it might actually not be a physical disc in the future.
Yeah, but most people can't afford a kaleidoscope. It's very expensive until Apple, Google, and Amazon start releasing that type of content. I don't think it's a fair comparison. Right now, I think Blu-ray is 56 megabits per second, and I could stream Blu-ray quality with my network connection, but not everybody can. There's a lot of people who can't even do 5 megabits per second. Now, Ultra HD is going to be even higher than that. And as you said earlier, it needs to be consistent. And that's another problem. You can get buffering when you're doing a 12 megabit per second, and it'll buffer content before it plays. But at 56 megabits per second, you're probably going to be using all that bandwidth just to keep up. And that's why it may not be as reliable.
But that's for streaming. But
I see what you're saying.
On
if
a
you want to
kaleidoscope
download it,
system, you're going to download, and you would just like instead of driving to your store or ordering it through Amazon, say you ordered it through an Amazon service. What if Amazon
you're
said,
right. That's a good
know
point.
What I mean?
Yeah, you can even put it on your Plex system if you have access to legally downloading it, because you could always rip a disc and store it in the full capacity, the full format, and your Plex system will play it as long as your home network is fast enough. But I didn't even think about that. That's a very good point. You can download it in the background, and you could always say, put the top 10 movies, always keep the top 10 movies on my disc, on my player.
On my server.
On my server, and you would only pay for it if you watched it. And then when it's time to watch, it's just, it's just there. No streaming required. That's very possible that could happen.
Yeah. And that, like, I have a Zapedi because I can't afford a kaleidoscope. And the interface with the Zapedi is really nice. But it's basically the same thing as a kaleidoscope, except you have, it's a lot cheaper. But you have the ability to download your movies to your own server, which I created one. And that's what I do now. But it's the idea of bringing movies in like that, like a kaleidoscope system. You're right. It's too expensive right now for the masses. But just like when plasma TVs came out and they were like $60,000 for the TV and $2,000 for the little player that went next to it. It's like things do come down eventually as the technology grows. And that's why I'm saying, like, I think in the future I think more and more people are they're doing streaming for exactly like you said. I wonder how much DVD and Blu-ray will even last, never mind 4K. And I love physical media. I mean, some of my listeners are probably like, what are you talking about? But I just don't see the longevity there. I was a huge Laserdisc fan, and that went away.
Yeah, I mean, another thing to consider, DVD hasn't gone away, and it's been around since the 90s. I just don't see Ultra HD or Blu-ray going away. As I said, I think the most likely case is the Blu-ray and DVD will never achieve the same level of popularity as DVD. But I think it'll always be around. There's enough people out there who insist on watching on media. I've seen plenty of them. It just not, even if it's only 20% of the people out there, that's still a large enough large enough group to do it. And perhaps we might be able to just download, like you said, to a server and then burn it to a disk. Because if you do it to a hard drives can crash and fail. You lose your content. So I guess you'd have to have backups.
Yep, in the process of all that too. I mean, what the market for 4K has got to be really, it's in the single digits in percentage. It has to be.
Yeah.
People like ourselves. I mean, so yeah, you're right. If you have 20% of DVD, that's still a decent sized market. And what I really do like is the fact that even all of the 4Ks, and I say this a lot on my podcast, it's like these discs, these physical discs, the stuff they do, people like Ron Howard, when you listen to him in some of his audio commentaries, they're literally making this stuff for us, that niche little part of society that loves home theater. That's what these discs are made for. That the whole thing is just geared for us. Nobody else is really buying it except for home theater fanatics. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, for me, I'd say 80% of my content that I watch movie theatrical is streamed. It's rare now that I actually buy a disc. I have plenty of discs. I have a ton of them, and I've got them, stored. I actually got to the point where I threw the jackets away because they were taking up so much space, and I'm like, what do I care about this plastic? So I took the disc out, and I put the 4K disc in like one of those sleeves, and then the extras and all that stuff, I just threw those away too. Because I rarely watch the extras,
Yeah.
And it did help deal with the storage required for that. But yeah, it's there's movies out there now that I'm just happy with doing it, because even the Dolby Atmos and the high quality audio, you can get that streaming too. And to me, it was probably more important for the audio to be at the peak, because the video's got to be good too, but audio I think completes the home theater.
Yes. And I mean, like we were saying before, there's compression there. And that's where I see the biggest inconsistency in the image might look good, but the audio, it tends to be a little less dynamic, and it is kind of noticeable more often than not. Whereas I find the image, when you're looking at streaming, if I watched it at my house on 4K and went over to your house and watched it streaming and vice versa, you wouldn't really see a difference.
Yeah, well, they're not side by side. That makes a big difference.
Exactly. And that's kind of what I think is what, if it's not side by side, it's hard to tell. And I think that's a good barometer on what you're looking at, to say like, oh, well, what do I need to buy that for? You really can't tell a difference in that way.
Well, we even say the same thing about some televisions. The OLED's absolute best picture you can get, but there's a lot of other televisions that have very high quality. But if you don't have them side by side, you'll really not be dissatisfied with, say, like a really good LED TV. And that's why we say, if you've got the money and you want it, go ahead. But if you want to go a little bit bigger, you would, like an OLED in the 75-inch is going to cost quite a bit of money, but you can get a really good 75-inch TV that's LED based that looks phenomenal, and you can save some money. As long as you don't have it side by side, you're good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I tell people all the time when they're starting their theaters, I'm like, go for sound and develop from there, and go for the cheapest, biggest picture you can afford.
Yeah,
because
I agree. In fact, we say go for the best speakers you can afford, and then fill in the rest around that.
Because you walk in a room with a 75-inch screen and a nice sound system, nobody really cares how good the screen looks. They just want it like, hey, that's big. Well, that's awesome.
Within reason.
Then
within reason.
Right.
I mean,
but
you
then
don't want
upgrade
a terrible
from
TV.
There. No. But at the same time, TVs, the technology changes far more rapidly than speakers.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the worst TV today is better than the best TV of 10 years ago. So that's where we're at now.
Exactly.
And just go buy a really cheap Hisense or even TLC, and it's better than the Sonys of 2005, 2010, that era.
Yeah, and there's a nice segue. You guys also talked about 4K versus 8K, and do you need to get an 8K TV? And for the longest time, I was like, you don't really need a 4K TV unless you get to a certain size, right? So like anything under 65 inches, 1080, your eye really can't tell the difference.
Well,
from 4K to 1080.
Well, the only reason I would disagree with you, your fact is correct. 4K to 1080p, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. But new 4K TVs also have HDR and the wider color gamut. So that's the only reason why it makes sense to get a 4K TV in whatever size, just because of that aspect alone. And in fact, I tell a story when I was working for Rockwell Collins. I was making the argument that putting a 4K TV on a bulkhead, they were talking about a 24-inch 4K TV on a bulkhead, because our customers demanded it. And I said, you can't tell the difference. And somebody argued, well, I saw one and you could night and day see the difference. But it was because it had HDR and it had the wider color gamut. And the funny thing is, he was at the manufacturer and they were demoing it with 4K HDR content. But at the time, the only content you can get in the cabin was DVD quality, actually like a megabit per second, because the studios did not want us putting HDR high, 4K content on an airplane, because what if somebody were to steal it and then dupe it and do whatever? So it was pointless. But the HDR is what made the difference, and that's kind of what's going on here with the 4K TVs. So now let's level the playing field. So so you're right, 100% correct, but there's a reason why you should get a 4K TV today.
Right.
If the field was the same and you went 8K, there's no difference, because the 8K is going to have HDR, wider color gamut as the 4K. You need to go over 100 inches before the resolution makes a difference, and actually more like 130 inches. It's just not feasible for most people. It's just a waste of money.
Yeah. And what I find interesting about that is, one, their marketing approach. They've always marketed the number because it's easy for people to it's easy to understand. Get your 4K TV. The 1080p, I think, is kind of funny because they went from, the original was like you could get a 720, 1080, you could get a 720i, 1080i, but
it was 720p or 1080i. Yeah, that's the way it was.
Right. And then it was like, oh, now we can get 1080p.
Yeah.
But the 1080 is obviously, it's your lines of resolution top to bottom. But now we want the bigger numbers. So we're going to lines of resolution across the top, from left to right or whatever. So that's why we went from 1080 to 4K. But it's always been about the number. And then at the 4K level, like you said, they had the opportunity to go to the HDR. But here we are, like you said, the level playing field. HDR is the same, color gamut's the same. We're going to 8K. Here's my question for you, because you and Braden were in the industry. Is it possible that the driving force behind stuff like this is because 8K cameras are important? And they are important, and even higher resolutions, because you can do more with it as the technology grows. It enables the artists to do more. Does some of the consumer, the money from buying the TVs for like Sony, does that help put technology into the hands of the artists too?
No, because the thing is, 4K, they were already shooting in 4K. They were already editing in 4K. They were doing everything in 4K to begin with, and then they down converted to 1080p. So to then just say, okay, now we have ability, just leave it in 4K. That was a easier sell to the studios, to the broadcasters. Now, though, 8K is the entire chain has to change. In fact, on over the air, the broadcast, they just are now getting to 4K. So I don't see them doing over the air 8K for a long time, especially because there's more bandwidth required. You need a larger spectrum to get that 8K. I don't see that happening. I don't see the studios upgrading. While what you said is correct, there's more you can do with 8K. You can just shoot 8K and then you can focus on the parts of the screen that you want. There's so much resolution. You can kind of zoom in and do and still keep.
You can do pans with a steady cam
and still preserve. Preserve the quality. That could be possible, but I think if they do the 8K, they're going to cut out a 4K portion of that. I don't see them moving to 8K. Even the streaming is everything we wanted to do streaming-wise. It's going to quadruple required for 8K or double, and it's just not going to, I think, be there now. Down the road, they may come up with another technology, even maybe a color gamut that is 100% of what the eye can see, and you may only get it on an 8K TV. So that may be what's going to happen down the road. But I don't see 8K content coming for quite some time, even though I know they have some now.
They have some, but it's very, very limited.
It's for
And
demos.
for everything. Yeah, exactly. For everything you just listed, the reasons why it's crazy
Yeah.
to think, like, how do you, I mean, we don't have to get into that, but do you think that they're selling this and pushing this just because they have to make TVs?
Well, they're just selling it because specifications are what sell televisions. And as you said earlier, 8 is larger than 4. That's literally the reason why.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, people I think now are used to buying their televisions, upgrading to something, and they're just trying to give people something. But it's our listeners, people in the know, it's not worth it. But I think the majority of the public are like, I know people that are like, oh, I'm going to get that new 8K TV. Why?
Well, here's what happened. When they made the jump to HD, so many TVs were bought. Everyone went from their old analog TVs that were still working to HD televisions. They had huge growth, huge sales. They got addicted to it. Now we're at a point where I've got a TV downstairs. Actually, the one in my master bedroom has been there for about 12 years. I don't have any need to upgrade it. There's literally, it's a 720p television as well. Why do I need to put a 4K TV in my master bedroom? Because we barely watch it. It's on in the morning a little bit while we watch news, or we put it on really before we go to bed just to give us background. Maybe the baseball game is on, and I just leave it on and I doze off watching it. So why am I going to spend money on a new TV there? And that's where a lot of people are at. They've got these great TVs, and there's no need to upgrade. To go from 1080p with HDR and the wider color, I think you might see an improvement. But even still, I have one television without HDR and one projector with HDR. The TV without HDR still looks good. It's a 4K Vizio P-Series TV, the first one that came out with the P-Series. It looks phenomenal. And my short throw projector looks phenomenal, and that has HDR. But it's really good, actually, but it doesn't drive me to want to upgrade the television downstairs. When it dies, I will buy something better, but not until that happens.
And that used to be the mentality. I mean, my parents, you bought a TV, you had that TV for like 30 years.
Yeah, I think people are in that mode, and the TV manufacturers are having a hard time with it after that huge growth they had in the 2000s, early 2000s.
Right. But as we've said many times on all the podcasts, that was a huge jump going to 1080, from going to high def, from standard def. That was a huge jump that everybody could see, anybody could see. And every growth since then has been so incremental, and it's been so hard to get consumers to buy in. I think HDR is good, but I don't think that's as big of a jump as what going to high def was.
Agree. I totally agree. To go from NTSC basically. PAL was a lot better than NTSC, so maybe they didn't see as much of a jump, although it was still a pretty good jump over in Europe to go from PAL to HD. But it definitely, NTSC to HD was huge, and you wanted to see it. Plus, you had more picture, too. It wasn't just the quality. You had a wider picture. And you didn't want to miss out on all the stuff that was happening on the sides.
Yeah, you don't want to go back to the Snyder Cut.
Yeah.
4x3. But, all right, that's all I had. Thank you for popping in.
Oh, sure, my pleasure. It's always fun visiting with you, DJ.
Yeah, you've are we going to do, what was it? Nobody, Mr. Nobody, or Nobody, was that the name of it?
Nobody, yeah. I was going to spend the money to get it when it was in theaters, and I just found out today it got released, and so I need to get around to watching it. The problem is, I am so busy, and I have got to find time to sit down and watch that, and I want to enjoy it and not try to force it. Right. Now, when you watch, real quick, because my battery's running out, do you watch the movies at night, or does it matter when you watch?
I watch in the morning. I watch at night. I watch whenever I can. And with me, it's tough because my son likes the room for his video games too. Yeah. So I'll be like, oh, he's in there. And then I'll go and watch a show with my wife or something. But I've always been that way. And now with the podcast, it's like, okay, now it is different though. Like if we're going to do a show on something, it's a different approach to watching a movie. And it's like, sometimes it is nice to know I'm not doing a show on it and just be like,
yeah, that's interesting that you say that. You don't want it to be a homework assignment. You want to just enjoy it.
Right. But yeah, exactly. But I do love, once I get into it for the shows, it's just like, I'm like, oh, and my wife's said this to me many times. She goes, since you started that podcast, you are even more enthusiastic about home theater than you ever were. And I'm like, well, because I'll come up, I'm like, check out this part.
Yeah. Oh, no, I totally get that. In fact, my kids get tired of me pointing things out to them.
Yeah,
they're like, Dad,
exactly. Well, now I have listeners to talk to instead of my wife, so she likes that aspect too. So,
yeah.
But I'll let you go before your battery dies. Thank you very much, Ara. That's Ara from HT Guys Podcast, the 1,000 episode guys. Him and Braden, the Godfather of Home Theater Podcast. And there's a whole bunch of them.
We were
Thanks
just
a lot,
first.
Ara.
That's all. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me, DJ.
And that's my conversation with Ara. Had a lot of fun. Thanks, Ara. Really appreciate it. Links to Ara's podcast and his website, HT Guys, those are all be in the show notes. Thank you very much. Always a great time. Always a great time. And he's so accommodating. At any moment, I'd be like, hey, you want to jump on? He's like, yeah, okay. So had a lot of fun. Thanks to my 14 patrons. Really appreciate that. Thanks to everybody on Twitter. Thanks to all the conversations. Having some fun. Keep the conversations going. And next week, I will be back. I'm telling you what it is now because I've already done it. It was actually supposed to drop this week, but I didn't feel like editing that. Like I said, I'm not feeling well. This is a little bit easier. So I just put ours out. But Mulan in 4K. Sat down and watched that with my daughter. We had a blast. I'll be talking about that next week. So until then, have a great week, everybody. Thanks for everything. Thanks for listening. Go push play. Hey, Fred. This has been a Hey Fred production with theme music by Jeff Bernhardt and Throne Vault Productions.